He walked in tanned, relaxed, and smelling like eucalyptus spar oil. I handed him a glass of wine, kissed his cheek, and asked, "Did Sabrina ever tell you what she picked up on that trip?" His smile died before the sentence finished. By the time he raced to the urgent care, my trap was already closing at home, at his job, and in court. My name is Claire Western. I am 32 years old, a program manager at a community foundation here in Chicago called Harbor Hope. And for the last hour, I have been standing in my kitchen playing the role of the perfect waiting wife. The hardwood floors of our apartment were gleaming under the recessed lighting. A bottle of Cabernet, Ethan's favorite vintage, was decanted and breathing on the granite island. The smell of rosemary and roasting chicken filled the air, a domestic perfume designed to signal safety, comfort, and home. It was a stage set, meticulous and floorless, constructed for an audience of one. I was waiting for my husband, Ethan Blake. He was 35, a sales director at Northbridge Dynamics, and he was currently returning from what he had described as a grueling 12 days of executive leadership training on the West Coast. When the key turned in the lock, I smoothed the front of my dress. I checked my reflection in the oven door to ensure my expression was soft, welcoming, and completely devoid of the knowledge that was currently burning a hole through my stomach. The door swung open. Ethan stepped inside, dropping his leather weekender bag by the entryway. "I'm home," he announced, letting out a long theatrical exhale. "God, Claire, you have no idea how good it smells here." He walked toward me, and immediately the narrative he had been building for 2 weeks began to crumble under the weight of visual evidence. He did not look like a man who had spent 12 days trapped in windowless conference rooms, looking at spreadsheets and quarterly projections. He looked vibrant. He was wearing a fresh white polo shirt that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, the fabric straining slightly against his chest in a way that suggested he had been hitting the gym. Not the buffet line, but it was the details that screamed the truth. His skin was a rich golden bronze, the kind of tan you do not get from a fluorescent-lit boardroom. It was the deep baked-in color that comes from spending 6 hours a day by a pool in Napa Valley. As he leaned in to kiss me, I caught the scent. It wasn't the stale smell of airplane recycled air or the metallic tan of office stress. He smelled like eucalyptus and peppermint. He smelled like high-end spar oil. I accepted his kiss, letting his lips linger on my cheek. I forced my body not to recoil. "Welcome back," I said, my voice steady. "You look rested." He pulled back, flashing that charming boyish smile that had won over half the board at Northbridge Dynamics. "Rested, I wish. It was a marathon, Claire. Seriously, I think I spent more time looking at strategy decks than I did sleeping. We were going until 11 at night some days." He walked over to the island and picked up the glass of wine I had poured for him. He swirled it, watching the red liquid coat the glass, completely at ease. He felt safe. He thought he had pulled it off. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. I watched him take that first sip, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be noticeable. I leaned my hip against the counter, crossing my arms over my chest. I needed to time this perfectly. I needed to catch him right at the apex of his relaxation. "That sounds intense," I said, keeping my tone light, almost conversational. "I can imagine how draining that must be. All those people, all that close contact." "Tell me about it," he said, taking another large gulp of wine. "But hey, it is over now. I am just glad to be back here with you." I smiled. It was a sharp, thin thing. "I am glad you are back too, Ethan. But by the way, did Sabrina ever tell you what she picked up on that trip?" The reaction was instantaneous and visceral. It was as if I had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart with a cold hand. The smile did not just fade, it died. It vanished so completely, it was like it had never existed. His hand, which had been bringing the glass back to his lips, froze in midair. His knuckles turned white as his grip tightened on the delicate stem of the wine glass. For a second, the only sound in the apartment was the low hum of the refrigerator. His eyes, which had been warm and crinkled with laughter a moment ago, went wide and then immediately darted to the left, then the right, scanning the room as if looking for an exit or a hidden camera. His breathing hitched, a sharp intake of air that got stuck in his throat. The leather laptop bag he had slung over his shoulder slipped. He had forgotten to hold on to it. It hit the floor with a heavy dead thud that echoed through the kitchen. He did not even look down at it. He was staring at me, his pupils dilating. "But," he stammered. The smooth, confident baritone of the sales director was gone, replaced by a higher, thinner pitch. "What are you talking about, Sabrina?" She was just there for the breakout sessions. I barely saw her. "Oh, I know," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming clinical. I walked around the island, moving closer to him. I wanted him to see the absolute lack of humor in my eyes. "I am not asking about the sessions. Ethan, I am asking about what she came back with. You know, the illness." He set the wine glass down on the counter. He missed the coaster, and the glass wobbled dangerously before settling. His hand immediately went to his pocket, patting the outline of his phone. It was a reflex. He wanted to check if she had texted him. He wanted to know if their story was still straight. "Illness?" he asked, a bead of sweat appearing near his temple despite the air conditioning. "She is fine." "I mean, I think she is fine." "Why would you think she isn't?" "Well," I said, inspecting my fingernails casually, "I heard it is something specific, something that shows up a few weeks later. It spreads through close contact. Very close contact. You know, shared towels, shared sheets, that sort of thing." I looked up and locked eyes with him. "If I were you, given how much time you spent in those strategy meetings, I would be worried. It is highly contagious." Ethan looked like he was going to be sick. The tan drained from his face, leaving him looking gray and waxy. He took a step back from me as if I were the one who was infected. "I need to check something," he mumbled, pulling his phone out. His fingers were shaking so badly he fumbled the passcode twice. "You should," I advised, my voice dripping with false sympathy. "The urgent care on 4th Street closes in about 45 minutes. If you leave now, you might just make it." I would not wait. "Ethan, not with something like this. You do not want it to become permanent." He looked at me, then at his phone, then at the door. Panic had completely overridden his logic. He did not ask who told me. He did not ask for the name of the disease. He just knew that he had been exposed, and the guilt was suddenly manifesting as a physical itch under his skin. "I have to go," he said, grabbing his car keys from the bowl where he had just dropped them. He did not even pick up his laptop bag. "I just remembered I need to pick up some things for the office for tomorrow." "Of course," I said. "Go take care of yourself." He bolted. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving me alone in the silence of the apartment. I stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of the elevator dinging down the hall. I looked at the glass of wine he had barely touched. I looked at the laptop bag he had abandoned on the floor in his haste. I walked over to the counter, picked up his glass, and poured the wine down the sink. Then I turned to look directly at you. If you are watching this, if you are listening to my voice right now, you probably believe in karma. You probably think that bad things happen to bad people naturally. But I am here to tell you that sometimes the universe is slow. Sometimes karma needs a project manager. My name is Claire Western. And if you believe that betrayal carries a price tag, then you need to hit that subscribe button right now. Because I am not just going to tell you how I court him. That is the boring part. Any wife can catch a husband. I am going to tell you how I took a single question, one simple terrifying question about a fake illness, and turned it into a weapon that dismantled his six-figure career, drained his hidden bank accounts, and ruined his reputation before he even got his test results back. He thinks he is racing to a doctor to cure a disease. He has no idea that the real infection is already in his house, on his computer, and about to be in his caught files. But before we get to the destruction, we have to go back. We have to rewind the tape. Because to understand why I burned his life down, you have to understand that I did not always hate him. In fact, 12 days ago, before he got on that plane, I thought Ethan Blake was the safest man in the world. I was wrong. Let me show you exactly how wrong I was. To understand the magnitude of the fire I was about to light, you have to understand the house I was burning down. You have to understand that I did not marry a monster. If Ethan had been a villain from the start, this would be a different story. It would be a story about survival. But this is a story about betrayal. And betrayal only works if you trust the person holding the knife. Let's rewind. 8 years ago, I was 24 years old, and I still had that specific kind of optimism you can only maintain when you have just moved from a small rusting town in Ohio to the skyline of Chicago. I was working as a junior coordinator for the Harbor Hope Foundation. It was grueling, soul-filling work. I spent my days trying to secure housing grants for low-income families, and I spent my nights worrying about the families we had to turn away. I met Ethan on a Tuesday in November. It was seating sideways, the kind of Chicago weather that hurts your face, and I had ducked into a crowded coffee shop near my office building to escape the wind. I was carrying a tote bag that was breaking my shoulder and a stack of grant applications that were due by 5:00. Every table was full except for one prime spot by the window, where a guy in a charcoal sweater was packing up his laptop. I hesitated, not wanting to hover, but he looked up and caught my eye. He did not just glance. He really looked. He saw the wet hair, the heavy bag, and the sheer exhaustion written on my face. He stood up immediately, slinging his bag over his shoulder. As he walked past me to the exit, he did not try to hit on me. He did not ask for my number. He just slid a napkin onto the table and walked out into the cold. When I sat down, I turned the napkin over in neat, architectural block letters. He had written, "You look like you needed it more than me." That was the Ethan I fell in love with. He was different then. He was 27, working in sales, but not yet consumed by it. He was hungry for success, sure, but he was not starving for validation. Back then, he had patience. He would listen to me talk about the systemic failures of the public housing system for hours, nodding as if I were explaining the secrets of the universe, never once checking his watch or making me feel like my small paycheck made my work less important than his. Our courtship was not expensive dinners and luxury escapes. It was built on the floor of a 500-T apartment in Lincoln Park that smelled faintly of old radiators. It was built on nights where we split a $3 frozen pizza because that was what the budget allowed. It was built on shared struggle. We moved in together 6 months after that coffee shop meeting. We split the rent down the middle even though he made a little more than me. We had a wall in the kitchen covered in yellow sticky notes. We called it the master plan. Pay off student loans by 28. Promoted to manager by 30. Buy a house with a yard for a dog by 33. We wrote these things down like they were legal contracts with fate. We believed that if we worked hard enough and loved each other well enough, the universe would honor the terms. The proposal happened in that same tiny kitchen 2 years later. There were no rose petals, no hidden photographers, no viral video setup. It was a Tuesday, just like the day we met. We had just finished dinner spaghetti with jarred sauce, and Ethan was washing the dishes while I dried. He was scrubbing a pot, talking about a client he had landed that day, and then he just stopped. The water was still running. He turned off the faucet, dried his hands on a rag, and turned to me. He looked terrifyingly serious. He said, "I could do this forever, Claire. The dishes, the spaghetti, the bills. I could do this every single day for the rest of my life, but only if you are in." "Are you in?" I stared at him, holding a wet plate. "I am in," I said. He reached into the ceramic jar where we kept the sugar packets and pulled out a ring he had hidden there, buried in the sweet and low. It was simple, classic, and perfect. He got down on one knee on the cracked linoleum, and I cried so hard I almost dropped the plate. We got married the following June in a small park beside the Chicago River. We could only afford 70 guests. My dress was bought off the rack during a sample sale, and the wind off the water was fierce. But it was perfect. My father, a man of very few words, gave a toast that made half the room weep. He talked about how I had always been the one to take care of others, and how relieved he was to see someone finally taking care of me. Ethan's parents were there beaming. They were proud of him. Ethan was the black sheep for going into business instead of law like his father and grandfather. But that day they looked at him with genuine respect. They saw the way he looked at me like I was the anchor that kept him from drifting away. The first few years of marriage were the happiest of my life. We were broke, but we were rich in rituals. Every Friday night was pizza night. No exceptions. We would order from the same place, open a bottle of cheap wine, and watch bad movies on the couch. Every Sunday morning, regardless of the weather, we went for a run along the lakefront trail. We would run until our lungs burned, pacing each other. If one of us fell behind, the other slowed down. That was the rule. We finished together. And then there was the anniversary tradition. For our first anniversary, we were too broke to buy gifts. So Ethan wrote me a card. Inside, he listed 5 things. 5 things I love about you this year. He wrote things like 1, the way you sing to the radio even when you do not know the lyrics. 2, how you are always kind to servers. 3, the way you smell like vanilla. 4, how hard you fight for the people at your job. 5, the way you look at me when you think I am not paying attention. He did it every single year. Every June, I would receive a handwritten card with a new list. I kept them all in a cedar box on my dresser. They were my most prized possessions. They were proof that I was seen. They were proof that even as he climbed the corporate ladder, even as he started buying better suits and working longer hours, he was still paying attention to me. We talked about the future constantly. We had a timeline for everything. We would start trying for a baby once. We had $50,000 in savings. We would move to the suburbs, maybe Naperville or Exton when he became director. Divorce was never a word we used. It was not even a concept. It was something that happened to other people. People who did not have sticky notes on their wall. People who did not run pace for pace on Sundays. We were a team. We were partners. I remember one night specifically about 3 years ago. We were lying in bed, the street lights casting long shadows across the ceiling. Ethan rolled over and rested his head on my chest. I do not know how people do this alone. He whispered, "The world is so loud, Claire, but it is quiet when I'm with you." I stroked his hair, feeling a surge of protective love so strong it almost hurt. "I am not going anywhere," I promised him. "We are in this for the long haul." And I meant it. I meant every syllable. When I looked at our 5-year plan, I saw chapters for promotions. I saw chapters for a mortgage. I saw chapters for vacations to places where we would not have to count pennies. But looking back now, with the clarity that only rage can provide, I realized what was missing. There was no chapter in that plan that accounted for Northbridge Dynamics turning him into a man who valued optics over integrity. There was no chapter that accounted for a woman named Sabrina Cole. There was definitely no chapter that mentioned him disappearing to a 5-star resort in Napa Valley with his colleague while I sat at home paying the electric bill. If you had asked me in year 8 of our marriage just 2 weeks ago how we were doing, I would have looked you in the eye and told you we were solid as a rock. I would have told you that Ethan was my best friend. I would have told you that we were the exception to the statistics. But here's the thing about rocks. From a distance, they look unbreakable. They look smooth and permanent. It is only when you get down on your hands and knees, when you pull out a magnifying glass and really look, that you see the hairline fractures. The cracks had been there for a long time. I just never thought I needed to look for them. I thought the man who gave me the window seat in the coffee shop would never take the seat in first class and leave me behind. I was so busy looking at the sticky notes on the wall that I missed the writing on the wall, and by the time I finally saw it, the roof was already caving in. It started with a promotion. About 18 months ago, Northbridge Dynamics named Ethan their new regional sales director. It was the title he had been chasing for 3 years, the one that came with a corner office, a significant salary bump, and a completely new team. We celebrated with champagne at a steakhouse downtown. I toasted to his hard work, to our future, to the chapters of our 5-year plan that we could finally afford to write. I did not know I was toasting to the beginning of the end. The change was not immediate. It was a slow creeping erosion like water wearing down a stone. It began with a name that started appearing in our dinner conversations like an uninvited guest, Sabrina Cole. At first, she was just a character in his work stories, a supporting actor in the drama of corporate sales. She was the brilliant account strategist who had transferred from the New York office. She was the one who stayed late to help fix the slide deck. She was the one who saved the pitch when the tech failed. Sabrina is sharp, Ethan would say, cutting into his steak. She thinks one step ahead of the client. It is terrifying, actually, in a good way. I nodded along. I was happy he had competent support. As a woman in management myself, I wanted to root for another woman succeeding in a male-dominated field. I told myself that my prickle of annoyance was just fatigue. I told myself I was not the kind of wife who got threatened by a female colleague. But then, the terminology shifted. It happened a few months into his new role. We were at a company happy hour standing in a circle with 3 other couples. Someone asked Ethan about his travel schedule, and he laughed, throwing his head back in that charismatic way he had perfected. Honestly, do not ask me, he joked. Ask Sabrina. She is basically my work wife. She knows my calendar better than I do. I think she even knows what I'm having for lunch before I decide. The group laughed. It was a standard corporate joke, a cliché used in offices across America. But the way he said it made my stomach turn. There was a familiarity in it, a casual claim of ownership. Work wife. It implies a partnership that mirrors a marriage. It implies intimacy, shared burdens, and a secret language that the home wife does not speak. I forced a smile, sipping my lukewarm white wine. Well, I said, trying to keep my voice light, I guess I should send her a thank you card for managing you. Ethan squeezed my shoulder, but his eyes were already scanning the room, looking for someone else. After that night, the red flags started popping up like weeds in a well-tended garden. Ethan had always been a man of simple tastes. He wore department store button-downs and used whatever deodorant was on sale. But suddenly, he began to evolve. He started waking up at 5 in the morning to hit the gym, obsessing over his macros and protein intake. He dropped 10 lb. His arms got defined. He started buying clothes without asking for my opinion. Slim fit shirts that hugged his chest. Designer trousers that cost $300 a pair. One morning, I walked into the bathroom while he was getting ready. The air was thick with a scent I did not recognize. It was muskia, more complex than his usual soap. It smelled expensive. New cologne? I asked, leaning against the door frame. He did not look at me in the mirror. He was too busy fixing his hair, styling it in a way that was trendier than he had ever worn before. Yeah, he said casually. Just wanted to switch it up. The old stuff was feeling a little college, trying to look for a new role. It smells nice, I said. Though what I really meant was, it smells like a stranger. Then there was the phone. The phone is always the first witness, isn't it? Before the receipts, before the lies, there is the phone. Ethan used to leave his phone on the kitchen counter for hours. He used to ask me to answer texts from his mom while he was driving. But suddenly the phone became an extension of his hand. We would be sitting on the couch watching a movie and his screen would light up. He would smile a small private smile that had nothing to do with me. When I shifted my weight or leaned toward him, he would instinctively flip the phone face down on the cushion. Who is that? I would ask. Just work stuff, he would say, his voice tight. Nothing exciting, just the team blowing off steam. At 9:30 at night. Sales never sleeps. Claire, you know that. I did know that. But I also knew that sales teams did not usually make my husband smile like he had just heard a secret. I tried to suppress my jealousy. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that I had male colleagues I texted with. I told myself that trust was a choice and I was choosing to trust him. But the gut knows. The body knows before the brain accepts it. I started feeling a constant low-level nausea whenever he mentioned her name. The breaking point for my denial came at a dinner party we hosted for our college friends about 3 months ago. We were all sitting around the table finishing dessert. The conversation turned to stress and workload. I do not know how you do it, Ethan, our friend Mark said. Managing that entire region sounds like a nightmare. Ethan swirled his wine, looking confident and flushed with success. It is a lot, he admitted, but honestly, I could not do it without my team, especially Sabrina. I mean, she is practically my better half at the office. She keeps me sane. My better half. The room went quiet for a fraction of a second. Better half is a phrase reserved for spouses. It is a sacred title. You do not give it to an account strategist. Our friends laughed it off because that is what polite people do. But I saw Mark's wife Sarah shoot a quick, confused glance at me. It was a look of pity. It was a look that said, "Did he really just say that in front of you?" I sat there frozen, feeling the blood drain from my face. I felt like I was watching a house, my house, the one I had built with my own hands, and suddenly noticing the dark, damp spot on the dry wall. It is just a spot. You tell yourself it is probably just humidity. It is probably nothing. But deep down you know that water comes from somewhere. You know that by the time you see the spot on the wall, the pipes behind it have already burst. That night after everyone left, I did not confront him. I was too afraid of the answer. I was too afraid of being the crazy, jealous wife. Instead, I cleaned the kitchen in silence. A few weeks later, our 8th anniversary arrived. I had bought him a vintage watch he had been eyeing for months. I had wrapped it perfectly. I cooked his favorite meal. When we sat down to eat, he gave me a beautiful pair of earrings. They were expensive. They were tasteful, but they were generic. They looked like something a personal shopper would pick out for wife, age 32. Thank you, I said, putting them on. They are lovely. Happy anniversary, babe, he said, clinking his glass against mine. Later that night, while he was in the shower, I went to the cedar box on my dresser, the box where I kept every single card he had ever written to me. I wanted to add this year's card to the stack. I wanted to read the list of 5 things I love about you this year. I needed to read it. I needed reassurance. I needed to know that despite the cologne in the gym and the work or wife comments, he still saw me. I looked at the dresser, no card. I looked in his bag, no card. I checked the kitchen counter, no card. I sat on the edge of the bed, the cedar box open on my lap. Inside were 7 years of love notes, 7 years of inside jokes, and specific beautiful observations about who I was. And then there was nothing. When he came out of the bathroom smelling of that eucalyptus steam, I asked him quietly, "Did you write a card this year?" He froze, towel in hand. A look of genuine confusion crossed his face, followed quickly by irritation. "Oh shoot, Claire. I am sorry. I completely forgot. It has been such a crazy week with the quarterly review. I will write one tomorrow." "Okay, I promise it is okay." I lied. "Do not worry about it." I closed the cedar box. The latch made a soft click sound in the quiet room. He did not write it the next day. He never wrote it. That was the moment. The tradition died. And looking back, I think that was the moment the marriage died, too. The Ethan who wrote those lists was gone. He had been replaced by this stranger in slim-fit shirts who had a better half that wasn't me. I closed the box, and for the first time, I did not feel safe in my own bedroom. I felt like I was sleeping next to a ticking bomb waiting for the countdown to reach 0. I just didn't know that the explosion would happen in Napa Valley. It happened on a Monday evening, the kind of generic rainy Chicago Monday that makes you grateful just to be indoors. I was on the sofa folding laundry and half watching a documentary when Ethan came through the door. Usually Mondays drained him. He would come home with his tie loosened, complaining about the weekly forecast meetings or the incompetence of the supply chain team. But that night he walked in with a buzzing electric energy. He looked like he had just closed the biggest deal of his career. He dropped his briefcase, loosened his tie with a flourish, and poured himself a drink before he even said hello. "Big news," he announced, turning to me with a grin that stretched from ear to ear. Actually, I finally got the green light." I paused, holding one of his dress shirts. "The promotion. Did they finalize the bonus structure?" "Better," he said, pacing the living room floor. "I have been selected to lead the executive strategy retreat. It is a 12-day intensive for our top-tier VIP clients. We are talking CEOs, angel investors, the heavy hitters, and they want me to run the whole thing." "Ethan, that is amazing." I beamed at him, genuinely thrilled. I knew how much he wanted to be seen as a leader, not just a salesman. "Where is it?" "The West Coast," he said quickly. "Some exclusive facility Northbridge rented out. But listen, Claire, before you get excited about the location, I need to manage expectations. It is going to be grueling. I'm talking about 6 a.m. Start times, workshops all day, networking dinners until midnight. I probably won't even have time to call you most days. It is going to be a blackout period for me." He was selling it. I see that now. He was using every sales tactic in his arsenal to frame this trip as a sacrificial duty rather than a vacation. He wanted me to pity him for having to go to California. He wanted me to feel grateful that he was working so hard for us. But at that moment, all I heard was West Coast and 12 days. My mind immediately started doing the math. I had nearly 3 weeks of vacation time saved up at the foundation. I had been hoarding them for a rainy day, and looking out the window at the gray drizzle, I thought, why not now? Wait, I said, putting the laundry basket down. 12 days. That is a long time to be apart. Why don't I come with you? Ethan stopped pacing. He stood very still near the liquor cabinet. Come with me, he repeated, his voice flat. Yeah. I stood up, walking toward him, excited by the idea. I have the leave saved up. I can bring my laptop and work remotely during the day while you are in your meetings. I won't get in your way. I will just hang out at the hotel, maybe go for a hike or find a spa. Then, if you get done early one night, we can grab a drink, or at the very least, we can have breakfast together before your day starts. It would be like a mini vacation for me and support for you. For a fraction of a second, a blink, and you would miss it. I saw panic in his eyes. It was a sharp-cornered animal look. His pupils contracted, his jaw set tight. Then he forced a laugh. It was a loud, hollow sound. Babe, come on, he said, shaking his head as if I had suggested we fly to the moon. You would be miserable. This isn't a vacation spot. It is a corporate conference center. It is boring. You would be stuck in a hotel room by yourself for 12 hours a day while I am locked in boardrooms. And honestly, I need to be in the zone. I can't be worrying about whether you are entertained. I can entertain myself, I countered, keeping my tone light and playful. I am pretty good at finding a pool chair and a book. I promise. I won't bother you. I just miss you, Ethan. 12 days is a long time. I reached out to touch his arm, an affectionate gesture. He flinched. He actually pulled his arm back, and his face darkened. The charming salesman mask slipped, revealing something ugly and irritated beneath it. Claire, stop, he snapped. The volume of his voice made me jump. This is work. Serious work. I cannot babysit my wife on a retreat. Okay, I need to focus on my career, not plan date nights because you are bored at home. The silence that followed was deafening. Babysit. The word hung in the air between us like a slap. In 8 years, he had never spoken to me like that. He had never implied that I was a burden, a child, or an anchor dragging him down. I felt the blood rush to my cheeks, hot and stinging. I felt small. I felt stupid for suggesting it. I am sorry, I whispered, taking a step back. I didn't mean to be a distraction. I just wanted to be with you. He sighed, rubbing his temples, composing himself. He knew he had gone too far. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me, but the hug felt mechanical. I know. I am sorry, I snapped. I am just stressed. This is a huge opportunity for me, Claire. If I nail this, it opens doors to the Soite. I just need to go do this, crush it, and come home. Okay, I said into his chest. But I didn't feel comforted. I felt like I had just been put in my place for the next 2 weeks. The apartment became a staging ground for his great escape. The atmosphere was weirdly tense. Ethan was constantly on his phone, but whenever I walked into the room, he would lower his voice or switch tabs on his laptop. Who are you talking to? I asked one evening, hearing him laugh behind the closed door of the home office. He cracked the door open just an inch. Just prep calls with the team. Sabrina and the logistics crew. Confidential client stuff. Confidential. Another wall. I tried to be a supportive wife. I told myself his stress was valid. I tried to make his life easier. 2 days before he left, I offered to help him pack. I can handle it, he said quickly. Don't be silly, I said, walking into the bedroom with a stack of his freshly ironed dress shirts. You hate packing. Let me help you organize the suitcase. I opened his suitcase on the bed, and that was when I saw the second wave of red flags. If the babysit comment was the emotional blow, the contents of that suitcase were the forensic evidence. He told me he was going to a corporate conference center for 12 days of meetings. So why was he packing 3 white linen shirts? Ethan never wore linen. He called it the Wrinkle City. He was a starch and cotton man, but there they were, brand new, with the tag still on them. They looked like something a man would wear to a beach dinner, not a boardroom. I dug a little deeper, my hands moving under the layers of socks. I found a pair of swim trunks, not his old faded navy ones that he used for laps at the gym pool. These were patent designer. They were cut shorter, the way European men wear them. I checked the tag. $150. I didn't know you bought new trunks, I said, holding them up. Ethan was standing by the dresser, shoving socks into a ball. He didn't look at me. Oh, yeah, the old ones were falling apart. Figured there might be a sauna or something at the facility. Better to be prepared. And the sunscreen? I asked, picking up a sleek white bottle from his toiletry bag. It was a high-end brand, $40 a bottle, designed for sensitive faces. Ethan was a man who usually bought the generic spray-on stuff at the drugstore. Sabrina recommended it, he said, the lie rolling off his tongue so easily. It was terrifying. She said, the West Coast sun is different. Didn't want to show up to a client meeting looking like a lobster. I put the bottle back. Right. Smart. I finished packing his bag in silence. My brain was trying to connect the dots. Linen shirts, designer swim trunks, expensive sunscreen. Don't come with me. But my heart refused to draw the picture. I forced myself to believe the lie because the alternative was too painful to look at directly. The night before he left, the air in the apartment was heavy. We lay in bed, the lights off, staring at the ceiling. I could feel the distance between us, wide as a canyon. Even though he was inches away, Ethan rolled over and draped his arm over my waist. His voice was soft, intimate, almost like the man I married 8 years ago. Hey, he whispered, I know I have been stressed. I know I haven't been the best husband lately. I held my breath, hoping for a confession, hoping for reassurance. When I get back from this trip, he said, kissing the back of my neck, everything is going to change for us. Claire, I promise. Everything is going to change. In a good way. I squeezed his hand, tears pricking my eyes. I thought he meant the bonus. I thought he meant we would pay off the car. Maybe finally take that real vacation to Italy we always talked about. I thought he meant he was going to fix us. I can't wait, I whispered back. I lay there awake long after he fell asleep, listening to his steady breathing, holding on to that promise like a lifeline. I didn't know then that he was telling the truth. Everything was going to change. He was planning to come back. Cash's bonus, leave me, and move into a townhouse with Sabrina. He was planning to erase me from his life. The good way was for him, not for us. He left the next morning before the sun came up. He kissed my forehead while I was half asleep, and by the time I fully woke up, the apartment was empty. He was gone, and I was left alone with the silence, the confidential secrets, and a lingering, sinking feeling that the man who just walked out the door was never really coming back. For the first 3 days, Ethan played the part of the exhausted corporate warrior to absolute perfection. He was careful. He was methodical. Every night at around 10:00, my phone would buzz with a FaceTime request. When I answered, he would be sitting in a room that was aggressively beige. There was always a blank cream-colored wall behind him, maybe the edge of a generic wooden headboard, but never anything identifiable. No hotel art, no view of the window. No room service menu sitting on the nightstand. He looked tired, rubbing his eyes, loosening his tie as if he had just walked out of a 12-hour negotiation. It is brutal out here, babe, he would say, his voice raspy. We have been locked in the strategy room since 7 this morning. I miss you. I miss my own bed. I would sit there in our living room, hugging a pillow, feeling a wave of sympathy for him. Go to sleep, Ethan. I would soothe him. You look wrecked. We can talk tomorrow. You are the best. He would whisper, love you. Then the screen would go black. It was a masterclass in deception. He gave me just enough contact to make me feel secure, but kept the visual field so narrow I could not see the truth. I did not notice then that the ambient noise in the background was not the hum of a city hotel, but the chirping of crickets, the kind you only hear in the countryside. I did not notice that he never complained about specific people. Only vague stakeholders. By day 4, the pattern shifted, the calls stopped. When I texted him around dinner time asking how the day went, the response was a bubble of silence that lasted for hours. Finally, at midnight, a text came through running late. Dinner with the investors ran over, exhausted. Talk tomorrow. Love you. Love you. It was punctuation. It was a seal he slapped on the end of a lie to make it airtight. Day 5 was a Friday. I remember the weather because a thunderstorm was rolling over Lake Michigan, rattling the windows of our apartment. I was sitting on the sofa with a glass of wine, scrolling through Netflix, trying to decide what to watch since I was alone for the weekend. Ethan's iPad was sitting on the coffee table. We shared an iCloud account for photos, but our messages were usually separate. However, sometimes, if the Wi-Fi sync was just right, a message would bounce between devices. At 9:15, the iPad screen lit up. It was a single banner notification from iMessage. Your swimsuit in that shade of red should be illegal. I stared at the words. My brain did not process them at first. It was like reading a sentence in a foreign language. A swimsuit. Red. I do not own a red swimsuit. My swimsuit is black. It has always been black. I reached for the iPad, my hand trembling slightly. But before my finger could touch the glass, the message vanished, unsent. He had realized his mistake. He had sent a text meant for someone else to his wife. Or perhaps he had realized the sync was on and panicked deleted it. But the notification preview had burned itself into my retinas. Your swimsuit in that shade of red. I sat there in the dark, the rain hammering against the glass. A logical, pathetic part of my brain tried to find an innocent explanation. Maybe he was joking with a buddy. No, men do not text other men about red swimsuits being illegal. Maybe it was a spam text number. The contact name was Sabrina. It was brief, but I had seen it for 8 years. I had respected his privacy. I never checked his phone. I never asked for his passwords. I believed that surveillance was the enemy of intimacy. But in that moment, looking at the black screen of the iPad, I realized that blind trust was not a virtue. It was a liability. I opened my laptop. I felt a wave of nausea, a physical sickness that tasted like bile. As I navigated to the banking portal for our joint credit card, we used a Sapphire Reserve card for everything: travel points, groceries, gas. He had taken the physical card with him for incidentals, claiming he would expense everything to Northbridge later. I typed in the password. My fingers felt cold and clumsy. Logged in successful. I clicked on pending transactions. The list is populated, scrolling down the screen in neat black and white Arial font. I expected to see a Marriott or a Hyatt near the San Francisco airport. I expected to see charges for Yuba or airport coffee. Instead, I saw a geography of betrayal. Silverado Resort Spa, Narper, car, the Vineyard Table, $382. Opus 1 Winery, tasting for $2, $200. Narper. He was not at a conference center in San Francisco. He was in wine country. I scrolled down, my breath coming in short. Sharp gasps. Serenity Spa, Cook's Ritual Package, $650 couples, not executive massage, not therapeutic couples. And then the charge that broke me, it wasn't the most expensive one. It was a charge from the resort concierge for $120 labeled in room, amenity romantic add-on roses, champagne cork. I put a hand over my mouth to stifle a sob. Roses. Ethan had not bought me roses in 4 years. He said they were a cliché. He said they were a waste of money because they just died anyway. But here, he was spending $120 of our shared money we were saving for a house. Money we were saving for a baby to have rose petals scattered on a bed for another woman. It wasn't just the sex. It was romance. He wasn't just sleeping with her. He was dating her. He was wooing her. He was giving her the version of himself that he had told me no longer existed. I needed more. The pain was blinding, but the investigator in me was waking up. I opened a new tab and went to our shared email account. We had a household email we used for utility bills and mortgage inquiries. Sometimes if he was in a rush booking travel, he would auto-forward confirmations there. I searched Silverado. There it was. A confirmation email from 2 weeks ago, buried under a pile of junk mail from Home Depot and Wayfair. I clicked it open. Reservation for Mr. Ethan Blake and MS. Sabrina Cole. Room type junior suite with king bed and valley view. Notes. Early check-in requested. There was no Northbridge team. There were no other colleagues, just the two of them. Playing house in a king-sized bed with a valley view. I felt like I was going to throw up, but I couldn't stop. I needed to see it. I needed to see them. I didn't have Sabrina on social media. I had blocked that avenue of pain weeks ago when my suspicions first started, but I knew who her friends were. I knew she hung out with a group of younger women from the marketing department. I went to Instagram. I searched for a girl named Jessica, one of Sabrina's work friends, who I knew was also on this trip. Jessica's profile was public, and there it was posted 3 hours ago. The photo was a selfie of Jessica and two other girls holding glasses of white wine beaming at the camera, with the golden California sun setting behind them. The caption read, "Golden Hour with the Dream Team. Narper nights work hard." I zoomed in on the background. It was blurry, but it was unmistakable. Lounge chairs by the pool, a man and a woman. The man was wearing the new patent swim trunks I had watched him pack. He was lying back on the chaise, one arm behind his head, looking relaxed and happy. Lying next to him, not on a separate chair, but squeezed onto the same single chaise lounge, was a woman in a red swimsuit. Her head was resting on his chest. His other hand was resting on her thigh. They were looking at each other, laughing. It wasn't a posed photo. It was a candid capture of intimacy. They looked like they had been together for years. They looked like they were the only two people in the world. I stared at the pixelated image of my husband's hand on another woman's leg. Something inside my chest made a sound. It wasn't a metaphorical crack. It felt like a physical bone snapping. It was the sound of the last thread of hope severing. Claire, who believed in the 5-year plan, died at that moment. Claire, who kept love notes in a cedar box, turned to ash. I didn't cry. That was the strangest part. The tears that had threatened to come earlier simply evaporated. The heat of the rage was too high for tears to survive. I sat up straight. I wiped my face, though it was dry. I created a new folder on my desktop. I did not name it Sadness. I did not name it Why. I named it Evidence Ethan Sabrina. I started screenshotting. I screenshot the credit card statement. Click. I screenshot the text notification preview I had managed to capture in my mind, then wrote down the exact time and content in a time-stamped note. I saved the hotel confirmation PDF. Click. I took a screenshot of the Instagram photo, then cropped it, zoomed in, and saved the enhanced version. Click. I worked for 3 hours straight. I was clinical. I was precise. I was no longer a wife discovering an affair. I was a prosecutor building a case for murder, because that is what he had done. He had murdered our marriage, our history, and the future I thought we had. By the time I closed the laptop, it was 2:00 in the morning. The storm outside had passed, leaving the city quiet. I walked into our bedroom. I looked at the empty side of the bed where he should have been. I imagined him in Narper, sleeping in that king bed with the valley view, smelling like roses and betrayal. "Enjoy the vacation, Ethan," I whispered to the empty room, "because when you get back, you are going to wish you had never left." The next 72 hours were not spent crying. I think I had cried all the tears I was capable of shedding during that first night of discovery. What replaced the grief was something far colder and infinitely more useful. It was a state of hyperfocus, the kind of clarity you get when the adrenaline hits you right before a car crash. I did not just want to know the truth anymore. I wanted to own it. I wanted to catalog it. I wanted to possess every single lie he had told so that when the time came, I could feed them back to him one by one. I became an archivist of my own destruction. I spent the entire weekend sitting at the kitchen island, my laptop open, a pot of coffee brewing, and a backup hard drive plugged in. I was methodical. I started with the credit card statements, downloading PDF copies of every single transaction for the last 18 months. I cross-referenced them with his calendar. The client dinners that happened on my birthday, the late nights at the office that coincided with Yuba, rides to a residential address in Lincoln Park that I did not recognize. But the real gold mine was the cloud. Ethan was tech-savvy enough to delete text messages from his phone, but he was lazy. He assumed that once a bubble vanished from his screen, it vanished from the universe. He forgot about the monthly backups. He forgot that our devices were linked by a family plan that he had insisted on setting up 3 years ago to save $20 a month. I'd accessed the backup file from 2 months ago. It took 3 hours to decrypt and download, but when it opened, it was like walking into a room where everyone had been talking about me behind my back. I found a thread with Sabrina from late nights 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning when he was lying right next to me in bed. She just doesn't get me. He had written to her. I tried to talk to her about the vision for the region, and she asks about the grocery budget. It is exhausting acting like I am happy. And then her reply, "You deserve someone who speaks your language." Ethan, you are playing small just to make her feel comfortable. I read that message 3 times. Playing small. I was the woman who had managed our finances so he could take risks. I was the one who proofread his resumes. I was the one who ironed his shirts for the interviews that got him this job. Then I found the message that hardened my heart into stone. It was from 3 weeks ago. Don't worry about the timeline. Ethan wrote, "I will handle Claire. The marriage is just paperwork now anyway. I am already gone. Just paperwork. 8 years of love, of pizza nights, of nursing him through the flu, of building a life from nothing reduced to administrative clutter that he was planning to shred. If the emotional betrayal was the knife, the financial betrayal was the twist." I kept digging. I found a folder in his shared drive labeled Project Horizon. I assumed it was work-related. I opened it, expecting spreadsheets about sales targets. Instead, I found a PDF document titled Lease Agreement, Oak Park Townhouse. My hands started to shake, not from sadness, but from rage. I scrolled to the signature page. There was Ethan's signature. There was Sabrina's signature. It was a 12-month lease for a beautiful 3-bedroom townhouse in the suburbs starting the 1st of next month. But how were they paying for the deposit? Renting a place like that required the first month, last month, and a security deposit. It was thousands of dollars. I opened a new tab and logged into our retirement portfolio. This was the money we had been saving since we were 25. It was our safety net. It was our Sunday fund for a house, for a baby, for a crisis. The balance was significantly lower than the last time I had checked. I clicked on transaction history. There it was, a withdrawal request from 10 days ago. Transfer out $60,000. Status processing. I felt the blood roar in my ears. He had not just cheated on me. He was stealing from me. He was taking the money I had saved from my nonprofit salary money. I had scrimped and saved while wearing old clothes and driving an old car, and he was using it to build a love nest with his mistress. I went back to the text thread. I searched for money. I found a text from him to Sabrina. "Don't worry about the deposit." I pulled the $60,000 from the joint fund. "We will pay it back after the quarterly bonus hits. She will never even notice it is missing for a few weeks. She will never even notice." He thought I was stupid. He thought I was so blinded by adoration that I wouldn't notice a hole the size of a luxury sedan in our life savings. That was the moment I stopped being a wife. I stopped being a victim. I became a strategist. My first instinct was to scream. I wanted to print these papers out, take them to the front door, and set his clothes on fire on the balcony. I wanted to call him right now in Narper and scream until my throat bled, but I stopped myself. I took a deep breath. If I confronted him now while he was 3,000 m away, he would spin it. He was a salesman. That was what he did for a living. He would gaslight me. He would say the withdrawal was an investment mistake. He would say the lease was for a colleague he was helping. He would say the texts were taken out of context. He would have time to move the rest of the money. He would have time to delete the evidence I hadn't found yet. No, anger is a clumsy weapon. I needed a sniper rifle. If I wanted to hurt him, really hurt him, I needed to hit him where he lived. And Ethan didn't live in our marriage anymore. He lived his career. He lived in his reputation. He lived in his bank account. On Monday morning, instead of going to work, I called in sick. I put on my most professional suit, the one I wore for board meetings, and I walked into the office of the most ruthless divorce attorney in Chicago. She listened to me for 45 minutes. She looked at the screenshots. She looked at the bank transfer. "We can nail him to the wall for the financial dissipation," she said, her voice cool and sharp. "Taking marital assets to fund an affair is looked upon very poorly by the courts. We will get the $60,000 back, plus interest, plus a significant portion of the remaining assets. But Claire, that takes time. The courts are slow. I don't just want the money. I told her. I want consequences. I left her office and went to a second appointment I had made. This one was with an employment lawyer who specialized in corporate compliance and whistleblowing. I laid out the situation at Northbridge Dynamics. He is the regional director. I explained she is a subordinate on his team. I have read the employee handbook. It says relationships must be disclosed to HR immediately. It also says that using client funds for personal expenses is grounds for immediate termination. The lawyer leaned forward, interested. Do you have proof of the client funds? I have the credit card statement showing the resort charges. I said, and I have the text where he says the trip is a write-off. If I can prove he expensed that romantic add-on to the company, is that fraud? That is absolutely fraud, the lawyer said. And if Northbridge Dynamics is a publicly traded company, which they are, they will be terrified of a scandal. If you present this evidence to them, they won't just fire him. They will erase him to protect themselves. I walked out of that building with a plan taking shape. I had the ammunition. Now I just need the delivery system. I needed a way to get him off balance. I needed him to panic. I needed him distracted so he wouldn't see the legal axe swinging toward his neck until it was too late. The idea came to me on Tuesday afternoon. I was in the break room at my office listening to two of my colleagues gossiping while the coffee machine sputtered. Did you hear about that resort in Narper? One of them asked. The one that had to shut down its spa. No. What happened? Some kind of health scare, she replied, waving her hand vaguely. Bacterial outbreak or something. People were getting rashes weeks later. Sounds miserable. It was just background noise. A snippet of news that meant nothing to them. But to me, it was the missing piece. I went back to my desk and Googled it. It was a minor story. A small warning issued by a local health department about a specific spa facility in Calistoga. Not even the one Ethan was at. But the details didn't matter. What mattered was the fear. Ethan was a hypochondriac. He was the man who WebMD a headache and thought he had a tumor. He was the man who used hand sanitizer after shaking hands with a client. If I could make him believe that his betrayal had physical consequences, that his luxury escape had infected him with something dangerous, he would not be thinking about protecting his phone. He would not be thinking about hiding his laptop. He would be thinking about saving his own skin. And while he was busy running to the doctor, terrified and vulnerable, I would have full, unrestricted access to the one thing I still needed, his physical work, laptop, and the encrypted files he kept there. The plan formed in my mind in 3 perfect layers. Phase 1, the psychological strike. I would use the illness to shatter his composure the moment he walked in the door. I would make him think the consequences of his affair were biological. Phase 2, the data heist. In the window of time while he was at the urgent care, panicked and distracted, I would breach his physical devices. I would get the definitive proof that linked the company credit card directly to Sabrina's expenses. Phase 3, the execution. Once I had everything, I would pull the trigger on the divorce filing and the corporate whistleblower report simultaneously. I would hit him at home and at work on the same day. I sat back in my chair, watching the cursor blink on my screen. He had spent 18 months lying to me. He had spent $60,000 of our money on a fantasy. He had called our marriage paperwork. I picked up my phone and set a reminder for the day he was due back. Welcome home, Ethan. I was going to give him a welcome he would never forget. We are back in the kitchen now. The scene was exactly as I described it an hour ago. The roast chicken was resting on the cutting board, the juices settling. The bottle of Cabernet was open. I was wearing the navy blue silk dress that Ethan had bought me for my birthday 2 years ago. The one he said made me look elegant. I watched him move around the island, completely unaware that he was walking through a minefield I had spent 3 days laying out. He was still talking about the trip. He had settled into a rhythm now, his lies becoming smoother with every sip of wine. He told me about the exhausting workshops in a windowless conference center in downtown San Francisco. He complained about the terrible hotel coffee and the fog that never lifted. It was a decent performance, but the lighting in our kitchen was unforgiving under the bright recessed bulbs. The truth was printed all over his skin. He had the kind of deep golden tan that takes days of dedicated sun exposure to achieve. There was a distinct pale V shape on his chest where his sunglasses had hung while he tanned a tan line that definitely did not come from a foggy business district. I let him talk. I nodded at the right times. I made sympathetic noises when he described the pressure of the stakeholders. I was the perfect audience. I was giving him exactly enough rope to hang himself. Honestly, Claire, he said, leaning against the counter and loosening his tie, I am just glad it is over. I think I crushed it. The feedback was incredible. We should celebrate. When my bonus hits next month, it is going to be big. It will change everything for us. It will change everything for us. That was the trigger. That was the phrase he had used before he left. Now I knew that us meant him and Sabrina, and change meant leaving me with nothing but a rented apartment and a broken heart. I picked up my wine glass, swirling the red liquid slowly. I took a small sip, looking him dead in the eye over the rim of the glass. That sounds wonderful, Ethan, I said softly. I set the glass down. By the way, did Sabrina ever tell you what she was treated for after this trip? The silence that followed was violent. It was not just that he stopped speaking. It was that his entire biological system seemed to be arrested. His hand, which had been reaching for a piece of bread, froze in midair. The confident, relaxed posture of the returning hero evaporated instantly, replaced by a rigid, terrified tension. He blinked once, twice, his brain trying to process the input. But he choked out. The word came out like a cough. Sabrina, I repeated, keeping my voice casual, bordering on bored. Did she tell you what the clinic said? I heard she had to go in for treatment right after you guys got back. I did not say STD. I did not say infection. I did not say herpes or chlamydia. I simply said treatment and clinic. But for a man who had spent the last 12 days sleeping with a woman who was not his wife, a man whose conscience was already rotting from the inside out, those words only meant one thing. The color drained from his face so fast it was almost impressive. The tan looked suddenly garish against his pale gray skin. His eyes darted around the room, wide and feral, reflecting pure guilt. What do you mean? He stammered. Is she okay? What did you hear? Oh, I don't know the specifics, I said, shrugging lightly. I picked up a napkin and dabbed at a non-existent spill on the counter. I just heard it was something that showed up in her blood work. You know, the kind of thing that stays dormant for a few weeks and then flares up. Apparently, it spreads through close contact. I looked up at him, my expression filled with a fabricated, innocent concern. Very close contact. Ethan dropped his wine glass. He didn't mean to. His fingers just stopped working. The glass hit the granite counter, tipped over, and shattered on the floor, sending a spray of expensive cabinet across the white cabinets. It looked like a crime scene. He didn't even look at the mess. He was breathing shallowly, his chest heaving. I need to. He couldn't even finish the sentence. He patted his pockets frantically, looking for his phone. You know, I said, stepping back to avoid the broken glass. The urgent care down on 4th Street is still open, but they close at 8:00. That gives you about 20 minutes. I paused, letting the implications sink in. If I were you, Ethan, I wouldn't wait. Things like that, they can spread to people you care about without you even realizing it. You wouldn't want to risk your health or mine. That was the final push. The mention of my health terrified him. Not because he cared about me, but because if he gave something to me, his cover was blown forever. He needed to know. He needed a test, and he needed it right now. I have to go, he gasped. He didn't offer an explanation. He didn't make up a lie about needing milk. He just turned and ran. He grabbed his car keys from the bowl. He grabbed his personal cell phone. But in his blind panic, in his desperate need to get to a doctor and pee in a cup, he made a fatal error. He left his work bag on the floor where he had dropped it when he walked in, and sitting right on top of the bag, buzzing silently with a notification, was his company phone. Ethan, I called out as he yanked the front door open. Dinner. I will be right back, he yelled, his voice cracking. The door slammed shut. I listened to his footsteps pounding down the hallway. I waited until I heard the elevator ding. The door slid open and then slid shut. I stood alone in the kitchen. The broken glass was still on the floor. The wine was dripping down the cabinets like blood. I did not clean it up. I did not move. I just smiled. It was a cold smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just won the war before the enemy even knew the battle had started. I walked over to his work bag. I pulled out his laptop, a sleek silver Northbridge Dynamics machine. I set it on the island. Pushing aside the roast chicken, I opened the lid. The screen lit up asking for a password. Ethan was a creature of habit. He was also a narcissist. He wasn't going to use a random string of characters. He wasn't going to use our anniversary. I typed in 6 digits. 041288. His birthday, April 12, 1988. Welcome, Ethan. The desktop is loaded. I didn't have much time. Urgent care was 10 minutes away. Even if he rushed, the intake process would take 15 minutes. I had maybe 45 minutes before he came back. Cleared of disease, but full of suspicion, I inserted my external hard drive. I went straight to Outlook. I didn't bother reading the emails. I just searched and exported. I searched for Sabrina Cole. I searched for hotel. I searched for expense report. I found a folder labeled Personal Do Not Archive. I opened it and there it was. The smoking gun I hadn't even known to look for. It was an email draft time-stamped from 3 days ago addressed to the HR director at Northbridge. The subject line was Remote Work Request Relocation. Dear Sarah, I am writing to formally request approval to transition my role to fully remote status starting next month. As you know, I am planning a relocation to the suburbs to better manage my territory. My new address will be in Oak Park. He listed the address of the townhouse he had rented with Sabrina. But it was the next paragraph that made my breath catch. Additionally, I would like to inquire about the policy for adding a domestic partner to my health insurance plan outside the open enrollment period. I anticipate a change in my marital status in the coming weeks. A change in my marital status. He had already written the email. He was planning to divorce me, move in with her, and put her on his insurance, all before he even had the courage to tell me to my face. I felt a fresh wave of adrenaline. I didn't just copy that email. I forwarded it to myself. Then I dragged the entire personal folder, his entire sent items history, and his chat logs onto my hard drive. I opened his internal chat application. I found the conversation with Sabrina Ethan yesterday 10:45 p.m. Just signed off on the expense report for the roses. Put it under client relations gift. Finance won't even blink. Sabrina, yesterday 10:46. You are bad. I love it. Can't wait to be in the new house and not have to hide this. I took a screenshot. I worked with the efficiency of a machine. Every file, every photo, every incriminating pixel was copied, zipped, and encrypted. 20 minutes later, my hard drive blinked, indicating the transfer was complete. I ejected the drive and slipped it into my pocket. I wiped the laptop down with the hem of my dress to remove my fingerprints from the keys. I closed the lid and placed it back in his bag exactly at the angle it had been before. I checked the time, 7:40. He would be at the clinic now. He would be sitting in a sterile room, sweating in his expensive polo shirt, waiting for a doctor to tell him whether his infidelity had cost him his health. He was suffering. He was terrified, but he had no idea that the real virus had just extracted everything it needed to kill his life. I picked up my phone and sent a single email to my lawyer attaching the zip file. Subject: the final male body. Here is the proof of the expenses fraud, the relocation plan, and the admission of the affair on company servers. It is all here. Pull the trigger. I put my phone down. Now I just had to wait for him to come home. I poured myself another glass of wine, careful to step over the shards of the broken glass on the floor. I sat on a bar stool, crossed my legs, and waited for the door to open. I was ready for the final act. The door opened 45 minutes later. Ethan walked in, and the change in his demeanor was jarring. When he had left, he was a man possessed by terror, sweating and gray-faced. Now he looked like a man who had just cheated death. His color had returned, and his shoulders were loose. He tossed his car keys onto the entry table with a clatter that sounded arrogant in the quiet apartment. They said I am clear, he announced, his voice loud, almost aggressive. I made them run a rapid panel. Everything came back negative. Clean bill of health. He walked into the living room, wiping a sheen of sweat from his forehead. The fear was gone, replaced by a simmering anger. He looked at me, and for the first time tonight, his eyes weren't shifty. They were accusatory. "What the hell is going on, Claire?" he demanded. "I just spent an hour in a waiting room thinking I was dying because of some rumor you heard. Where did you even hear that?" I looked it up on the way back, and there is nothing on the news about a current outbreak. I was sitting on the sofa. I had not moved since he left. On the coffee table in front of me, arranged in neat, terrifying piles, was the harvest of my weekend investigation. I looked up at him. I did not smile. I did not stand up. Though I said, my voice was steady, calm, and completely devoid of warmth. "I am glad you are physically healthy. Ethan, now that we know you are okay, we can talk about everything that is sick in our marriage." Ethan stopped dead in the middle of the room. He looked at the coffee table. He saw the stack of papers. He saw the glossy photo printouts. He saw the black and white bank statements. His confusion flickered, then hardened into a defensive crouch. "What is this?" "Sit down," I said. It wasn't a request. "I am not sitting down until you tell me why you sent me on a wild goose chase," he snapped, crossing his arms. "I sent you to the doctor because I needed 45 minutes with your laptop," I replied. The blood drained out of his face again, faster than it had when I mentioned the clinic. He looked at his work bag in the hallway, then back at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "You hacked my computer," he whispered. "That is illegal, Claire." "So is fraud," I countered. "So is forgery. So is theft." I reached forward and picked up the first piece of paper. It was the invoice from the Silverado resort. "Let's start with the easy stuff," I said, sliding the paper across the table toward him. "You told me you were at a business hotel in San Francisco. This is a receipt for a junior suite at a resort in Napa Valley. The dates match your trip exactly." Ethan glanced at the paper, then looked away. "We had off-site meetings there. The whole leadership team went. It was a last-minute change." "Really?" I picked up the second sheet. "Does the leadership team usually share a room? Because this confirmation lists 2 guests, Mr. Ethan Blake and MS. Sabrina Cole. That is a booking error," he said quickly. His reflex to lie was so ingrained, it was almost pathetic to watch. "Admin messed up the room assignments. We sorted it out when we got there. I slept in a different room." "Did you?" I picked up the receipt for the romantic add-on. "Did the admin also mistakenly order the lover's welcome package with rose petals and champagne for $120? Was that for the team-building exercise?" "It was a joke," he said, his voice rising. "It was an inside joke with the team. You are reading too much into this." I didn't argue. I just reached for the photo. The one I had cropped and zoomed in on. The one of him and Sabrina on the Char's lounge, limbs tangled together, looking at each other like they were the only 2 people on Earth. I placed it on top of the receipts. "Is this an inside joke too?" I asked. "Because from where I am sitting, it looks like my husband lying in the sun with his hand on his assistant's leg." Ethan stared at the photo. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The team trip defense crumbled. He couldn't spin this. There was no context in the universe where that photo was innocent. He let out a long ragged sigh and ran a hand through his hair. He dropped onto the armchair opposite me, defeated. "Okay," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Okay, it happened. We got close. The stress of the job, we just bonded. It was a mistake, Claire. It was a stupid one-time fling. It meant nothing." "A one-time fling," I repeated. I reached for the stack of text messages. I fanned them out like a winning poker hand. "Is that why you texted her? I can't wait to wake up next to you every day in that townhouse." I read the words aloud. "Is that why you told her our marriage is just paperwork?" Ethan flinched with every sentence. He looked small. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the desperate scrambling of a man caught in a spotlight. "I was confused," he pleaded. "I didn't mean it. It was just fantasy talk. You know how it is. You say things in the moment. I don't know how it is." "Actually," I said, I have never told another man that I wanted to erase my spouse. I picked up the final document. This was heavy artillery. This was the twist. You can lie about the sex, Ethan. You can lie about the feelings, but numbers don't lie. I placed the lease agreement for the Oak Park townhouse on the table. Beside it, I placed the print out of the retirement fund withdrawal request. You signed a lease, I said, and to pay for the deposit on that lease, you took $60,000 from our joint retirement account. I was going to put it back. He interrupted, leaning forward, his eyes wide and wet. I swear, Claire, as soon as the bonus hit, I was going to replace it. You never would have known. I know that, I said, but that is not the point. I pointed a finger at the bottom of the withdrawal form. Look at the signature line. Ethan, he looked. That is my name, I said. That is my electronic signature. But I didn't sign this. I didn't authorize this withdrawal. You logged in as me. You scanned my signature from our tax returns, and you pasted it onto this document. I let the silence stretch. I wanted him to hear the word before I said it. That is forgery, I said. And since you use the internet to do it, it is wire fraud. And since you took more than $10,000, it is a felony. You didn't just cheat on me. You committed a crime against me. Ethan looked at the document, and then he looked at me with genuine horror. The reality of the situation finally pierced his narcissism. He wasn't just losing a wife. He was looking at a prison sentence. He started to cry. It wasn't a dignified cry. It was ugly, sobbing, gasping breaths. Claire, please, he begged, sliding off the chair onto his knees. Please, I panicked. I was having a breakdown. It is this midlife crisis thing. I don't know. I felt trapped. I didn't want to hurt you. I just didn't know what I wanted. I am sorry. I will put the money back. I will break the lease. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. He reached for my hand. I pulled it back sharply. You are scared, I said, observing him like a bug under a microscope. You are not sorry. You are just terrified of what happens next. I love you, he sobbed. I still love you. Don't throw 8 years away because of a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash. I said, I forging my signature to steal $60,000 to move in with your mistress is a strategy. I stood up. I towered over him as he knelt on the rug. And speaking of strategy, I said, delivering the final blow. You should know that you don't just have to worry about me. He looked up, wiping his nose. What do you mean? I didn't just print these files. I said, while you were at the clinic, I sent a zip file to your employment lawyer at Northbridge Dynamics, and I sent a copy to the HR compliance hotline. Ethan froze, his mouth hung open. I sent them the receipts for the resort. I continued. I sent them the proof that you used the corporate card for the romance package. I sent them the email where you asked to put Sabrina on your insurance, and I sent them the chat logs where you admitted to hiding the expenses. Did you tell Northbridge? He whispered. The color had left his face permanently now. Claire, that is my career. That is my entire life. They will fire me. They will blackball me. Yes, I said. They probably will. How could you do this to me? He screamed, scrambling to his feet. His sadness vanished, replaced by pure venomous rage. I am your husband. How could you destroy me like this? I looked at him. I looked at the man I had shared a bed with for 8 years, the man I had made soup for, the man I had trusted with my life, and I felt absolutely nothing. I didn't do this to you. Ethan, I said. I didn't book the room. I didn't sleep with Sabrina. I didn't forge the signature. And I didn't steal the money. I stepped closer to him, my voice dropping to a whisper. I just turned the lights on. I said, I just let everyone see what you have been doing in the dark. He stood there shaking, his hands clenched into fists, but he knew he was powerless. I held all the cards. I held the evidence. I held his future in a zip file. Tonight, I said, you are going to pack a bag, just the essentials. And then you are going to leave. This is my house, too, he spat. Not anymore, I said. Not after what you did with the retirement fund. If you stay, I will call the police, and I will file the fraud report tonight. If you leave, I will let the lawyers handle it in the morning. He looked at me, weighing his options. He looked at the door. He looked at the ruins of his life spread out on the coffee table. Tomorrow, I said, my lawyer will send your lawyer the papers. You don't live here anymore, Ethan. It was the first time I had said those words aloud. I waited for my voice to shake. I waited for the grief to hit me, but it didn't. My voice was as steady as steel. He stared at me for one last second, searching for Claire, who used to forgive him for everything, but she wasn't there. He turned around, walked into the bedroom, and I heard the sound of a suitcase zipper. It was the same sound I had heard 12 days ago, but this time I knew he wasn't coming back. And this time, I was the one sending him away. The morning after I kicked Ethan out, the silence in the apartment was different. It was not the empty, lonely silence I had felt while he was in Narper. It was the clean, sharp silence of a battlefield after the smoke had cleared. I drank my coffee standing up, looking at the empty spot on the floor where his work bag used to sit. By 10:00, the first domino fell. My employment lawyer called me with the update. She had a contact inside Northbridge Dynamics legal department, and the news was traveling fast. At 9:15 that morning, Ethan had tried to log into his corporate account to check his email. He was locked out. Access denied. 10 minutes later, he received a call from HR. They'd informed him that they had received a credible documented report regarding undisclosed relationships with subordinates and the misappropriation of client funds. They did not ask for his side of the story. They simply told him he was being placed on immediate administrative leave with pay pending a formal investigation. But here was the kicker. Sabrina was placed on leave, too. They had been smart enough to separate the variables by suspending both of them simultaneously and revoking their access to the building. Northbridge had effectively cut off their communication loop. They could not meet in the break room to get their stories straight. They could not access the shared drives to delete the incriminating files. They were isolated, panicked, and watching their careers dissolve in real time. At noon, my phone rang again. It was a number I did not recognize. Hello, I answered. Is this Claire? A male voice, hesitant, tired. Yes, who is this? My name is Lucas Hart, he said. I am Sabrina's husband. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of sympathy. I knew exactly where he was right now. I knew the shaking hands. I knew the Norser. Lucas, I said, my voice softening. I was wondering if you would call. I got an email, he said, from an anonymous address. It had everything, the receipts, the photos, the lease agreement. I know, I said. I am the one who sent it. We met an hour later at a small, nondescript coffee shop halfway between my apartment and the suburbs. Lucas did not look like the monster Ethan had described in his texts. Ethan had painted Sabrina's husband as a controlling, jealous tyrant who stifled her creativity. The man sitting across from me was a high school math teacher wearing a corduroy jacket that had seen better days. He looked kind. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had spent the last 12 hours trying to understand how his life had exploded. We sat in the corner booth, two strangers bonded by the same wreckage. She told me it was a training seminar, Lucas said, staring into his black coffee. She said it was mandatory. She even made me feel guilty for asking if she could call home to say good night to the girls. She said I was being suffocated. I nodded. Ethan told me I was bored. He told Sabrina that our marriage was just paperwork. He said I didn't get his vision. Lucas let out a dry, humorless laugh. Sabrina told Ethan I was controlling. She told him I checked her mileage and tracked her phone. I have never tracked her phone in my life, Claire. I trusted her. I honestly thought she was just working hard for our family. We laid the timelines side by side. It was sickeningly perfect. The late nights Ethan spent at the office matched the nights Sabrina had networking dinners. The weekend Ethan went to visit his parents matched the weekend Sabrina went to a yoga retreat. But then we got to the money. I saw the lease for the townhouse. Lucas said quietly, $60,000 for a deposit. I checked our savings account this morning. It is gone. She drained the college fund for our daughters. She took money meant for their education to build a life with your husband. He pulled out his phone. His hand was trembling. Look at this, he said, turning the screen toward me. It was a photo taken in a living room that looked chaotic and full of love. There were toys on the floor. In the center of the frame, two little girls, maybe 5 and 7 years old, were holding up big pieces of construction paper. They had used glitter glue and markers. The signs read, "Welcome home. Mommy, we missed you." They made these for her return, Lucas whispered, his voice cracking. They were waiting by the door yesterday when she came home. She walked right past them, went into the bedroom, locked the door, and started texting Ethan. I looked at those little girls in the photo, innocent and beaming, holding signs for a mother who had spent 12 days in a Napa resort, erasing their father from her future. Something inside me shifted. My anger toward Ethan was infinite. I wanted to burn his world to ash. But looking at those kids, I realized there were innocent bystanders in this war. "Lucas," I said firmly, "we are going to destroy them. But we are not going to let this touch those girls, any more than it has you." We made a pact right there in the coffee shop. It was a strategic alliance. "You file for divorce immediately." I told him, "You have the evidence of the affair and the theft of the college fund. You petition for full custody. No judge in Illinois is going to look at a mother who stole her children's tuition to run away with her boss and think she deserves primary care." "I will," Lucas said, straightening up. "She is not taking my girls into that townhouse. And I will handle the finances." I said, "I am going after the assets. I am going to make sure that by the time the dust settles, Ethan and Sabrina won't have enough money to rent a studio apartment, let alone that townhouse." We also agreed to be witnesses for each other. If Northbridge needed testimony to corroborate the timeline of the affair, we would both talk. If Lucas needed me to testify about the forged signature on the lease to prove a pattern of financial abuse, I would be there. By the time I left the coffee shop, I felt stronger. I wasn't just a scorned wife anymore. I was part of a team. Over the next 48 hours, the shock waves of what I had done began to hit Ethan from every angle. It started with the social circle. I had called my parents the night I found out. My father, a man who had toasted Ethan at our wedding, called Ethan's parents. I don't know exactly what was said, but I know that Ethan's mother called him in tears, asking how he could bring such shame to the family. Then the friends found out. I didn't post anything on Facebook. I didn't have to. I just changed my relationship status to single and removed my profile picture. When people messaged me asking what happened, I replied with a simple factual sentence. Ethan decided to pursue a relationship with his subordinate at work, and unfortunately, he used our retirement savings to fund it. The rumor mill did the rest. Mutual friends who had invited us to barbecues and weddings suddenly stopped returning Ethan's texts. He was radioactive in their eyes. He wasn't just a guy who cheated. He was a guy who stole from his wife. That is a different kind of social stain. But the biggest blow came from Northbridge Dynamics. 3 days after the investigation began, the company made their move. They were a massive corporation. They cared about one thing: protecting the stock price. A scandal involving a regional director misusing client funds and sleeping with staff was a PR nightmare. They wanted to suffocate immediately. They called Ethan in for a meeting. He wasn't allowed in the building. They met him at a law firm downtown. My lawyer got the details later. It was brutal. They gave him a choice. Option A, they fire him for cause. They make the findings of the investigation public. They list gross misconduct and financial fraud on his permanent employment record, making him essentially unhireable in the industry, and they sue him for the misappropriated funds. Option B, he resigns immediately. He signs a strict non-disclosure agreement. In exchange, they won't list the specific reasons for his departure in his reference file. They will just confirm the dates of employment. But there was a catch, a massive one. If he chose option B, he would forfeit his entire quarterly bonus. The bonus he had bragged about. The bonus he was counting on to pay back the $60,000 he had stolen from me. The bonus that was supposed to fund his new life with Sabrina. Also, there would be no severance package, no golden parachute, nothing. Ethan signed the resignation papers. He had no choice. He had to save what was left of his reputation. He walked out of that office unemployed, broke, and facing a massive debt to his soon-to-be ex-wife. That evening, my phone rang. It was Ethan. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but I decided I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear the voice of a man who had lost everything. "Claire," he said when I answered. He sounded drunk or maybe just broken. "Hello, Ethan." "I signed the papers," he said, his voice slurring slightly. "I resigned. They took the bonus. They took everything. Are you happy now?" "I am not happy," I said. "Justice doesn't make you happy, Ethan. It just restores the balance." "Look," he said, his tone shifting to a desperate, wheedling beg. "We need to talk about the divorce settlement. If we drag this through the courts, it is going to ruin both of us. The legal fees will eat up whatever assets are left. Can't do this quietly? Can't we seal the records?" He was still trying to manage the optics. He was still trying to sell me on a deal that benefited him. "You want to keep it quiet?" I asked. "You want to pretend this didn't happen so you can start over with Sabrina and pretend you are a victim?" "I just want a chance to rebuild," he said. "Please, Claire, for the sake of what we had, keep the details off the record. Don't put the fraud stuff in the divorce filing. Just file for irreconcilable differences." I walked over to the window of my apartment, and looked out at the Chicago skyline. I thought about Lucas Hart and his daughters. I thought about the red swimsuit. I thought about the rose petals I paid for. "I will give you this much, Ethan," I said. "The only thing I am willing to keep quiet about is your medical results. I won't tell anyone you tested negative for that clinic scare. That can remain between us." I paused, letting the silence hang heavy on the line. "But everything else, theft, the forgery, the lies, it all goes on the record. I am filing for divorce on the grounds of adultery and financial dissipation, and I am attaching every single receipt." "Claire, don't," he whispered. "Goodbye, Ethan," I said. I hung up the phone. The dominoes had all fallen. He was down, but I wasn't done yet. There was one final scene to play out. One final moment where I had to stand in front of the world and reclaim my name, and I was ready for it. The final battle did not happen in a courtroom with a banging gavel. It happened in the sterile, air-unconditioned silence of a conference room on the 42nd floor of a downtown law firm. The table was long and made of polished mahogany, a surface so shiny I could see the reflection of my own face in it. I looked calm. I looked like a woman who had slept 8 hours a night for the last week, even though I had barely slept at all. Ethan sat on the other side. He looked terrible. The California tan that he had flaunted just a few days ago had faded into a sallow, yellowish complexion. He was wearing a suit that looked slightly too big for him, as if the stress of the last 72 hours had physically shrunk him. Next to him sat his lawyer, a man with tired eyes and a frayed collar, who had clearly reviewed the evidence and realized he was bringing a knife to a nuclear war. My lawyer, a woman named Rebecca, who had a reputation for being a shark in silk, opened the file folder in front of her. The sound of the paper turning was the only noise in the room. "We are here to finalize the dissolution of the marriage between Claire Western and Ethan Blake," Rebecca said, her voice crisp. "Given the overwhelming evidence of adultery, financial dissipation, and fraud, we have prepared a settlement agreement that we believe is generous, considering the alternative is a criminal trial." Ethan flinched at the word criminal. Rebecca laid out the terms. They were brutal, but they were fair. "First," she said, "Claire retains sole ownership of the Chicago apartment. The mortgage will be refinanced in her name, and Ethan will sign a quitclaim deed today." Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but his lawyer put a hand on his arm to silence him. "Second," Rebecca continued, "Claire will retain 80% of the remaining retirement assets. This is to account for the financial infidelity and the emotional distress caused by the affair. Third," she said, sliding a piece of paper across the table, "Ethan will immediately repay the $60,000 he fraudulently withdrew from the joint account. Additionally, since he admitted to using anticipated bonus funds to plan a life apart from his wife, he will pay a lump sum of $20,000 as punitive damages." "That is insane," Ethan finally snapped, standing up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You want the apartment, most of the retirement fund, and $80,000 in cash. I'm unemployed. Claire, you know that I just lost my job because of you. Where am I supposed to get that kind of money? I looked at him completely unmoved. You leased a townhouse for $3,000 a month. Ethan, you spent $600 on a spa day. You seem to have plenty of money when you were spending mine. It is unfair. He spat. I am destitute. I can't sign this. Rebecca leaned forward. She didn't raise her voice. She dropped it. Mr. Blake, she said softly, let me be very clear about your position. We have a digital forensic report that proves you logged into your wife's account and copy-pasted her electronic signature onto a withdrawal form. That is forgery because you did it over the internet. It is wire fraud in the state of Illinois. Those are felonies. If we leave this room without a signature, my next call is not to a judge. It is to the district attorney. Ethan looked at his lawyer. His lawyer looked down at his notepad and gave a barely perceptible nod. The message was clear. Sign the papers or go to prison. Ethan sank back into his chair. The fight went out of him like air leaving a balloon. He looked at the settlement agreement. It was a life sentence of debt, but it was better than a cell. Fine, he whispered. I will sign. One more thing, I said. I reached into my own bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a legal form. It was a simple statement I had typed up myself. What is this? Ethan asked, eyeing the paper wearily. It is an admission of facts, I said. It states that every dollar you spent on the Narper trip and every dollar you spent on the townhouse was done without my knowledge or consent. It states that you used marital funds to facilitate an affair with a subordinate. Why do you need this? He asked, his voice trembling. You already have the money. For the file, I said. I want it attached to the divorce decree. I want a permanent public record that states exactly why this marriage ended. I don't want you spinning a story 5 years from now about how we just grew apart. I want the truth in black and white. He stared at me. He hated me at that moment. I could see it, but he picked up the pen. He signed the settlement. He signed the deed to the apartment. And finally, he signed my statement. As he scribbled his name, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. For 18 months, I had been the victim. I had been the clueless wife waiting at home while he played games. But in this room, holding that pen, he was the one following orders. I wasn't just surviving the wreckage anymore. I was the one designing the architecture of the ruin. We walked out of the conference room 20 minutes later. The lawyers went ahead to the reception desk to notarize the copies. Ethan and I were left alone in the long carpeted hallway. He looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked like he wanted to say a million things, to scream, to beg, to blame. But when he spoke, his voice was quiet and haunted. Was the whole clinic thing really necessary? He asked. It was pathetic. Of all the things he had lost his job, his money, his marriage. He was still fixated on that one moment of terror when he thought he was sick. You let me think I was dying, Claire. He said, you let me sit in that waiting room for an hour thinking I had infected myself. That was cruel. I looked at him, adjusting the strap of my bag on my shoulder. I needed you to feel it, I said. I needed you to feel just for a few hours what I have been feeling for months. I needed you to know what it feels like to realize that something dangerous has been growing in the dark because of your choices. He flinched. I thought you were sick. I continued. I thought our marriage was sick, but it turns out the only thing contagious was your lies. I turned and walked toward the elevator. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what he looked like. Standing there, a man who had gambled everything on a secret luxury escape and lost the only home he ever really had. At night, the apartment felt different. It was no longer our apartment. It was mine. The legal papers said so. I poured myself a glass of wine, a cheap bottle I had bought for myself, not the expensive vintage Ethan liked. I stood by the window looking down at the Chicago traffic, the red tail lights streaming like blood through the veins of the city. I took off my wedding ring. I didn't throw it across the room. I didn't flush it down the toilet. I simply placed it in the small velvet box where it had lived before he put it on my finger, and I snapped the lid shut. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Lucas. The court granted primary custody. The girls are staying with me. Thank you. I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. The money was just paper. The apartment was just brick and mortar. But those little girls, that was the victory. That was the only thing that truly mattered. We had stopped the damage before it could ruin their lives. I looked out at the city one last time. My husband went on a secret luxury escape, thinking he would come back to the same quiet wife and the same safe life. He thought he could build a paradise on the ruins of my trust. All it took was one question to wipe the smile off his face, one question to pull the thread that unraveled his career, his future, and the fortress of lies he had built over 18 months. I am alone now. I am tired. I have lost a decade of my life to a man who didn't deserve a single hour of it. But as I stand here listening to the silence of a home that is finally truthful, I realize I have kept the one thing he tried hardest to take from me, myself. And that is enough. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this tale of justice served cold, please leave a comment down below telling me where you are listening from. I love reading about all the different places our community calls home. Don't forget to subscribe to the Azad Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to know that sometimes the truth really does set you free.